welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have today Dr. Randall Bell. Randall, welcome.
Guy, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
All right. So Dr. Bell is a socio-economist and the CEO of Landmark Research Group. His work and research have taken him to all 50 states and all 7 continents, consulting on major disasters like the World Trade Center, the Flight 93 crash sites, the BP oil spill, and the Hurricane Katrina, among others. Dr. Bell also has a podcast, and that is called, what is the name of that? I'm sorry.
It's post-traumatic thriving, just like the book.
Okay, awesome. So to describe that, he says, when trauma hits, your most significant decision will be to dive, survive, or thrive. If you choose to thrive, the Post-Traumatic Thriving Podcast is for you. The host, Dr. Bell, along with Tanya Brown, along with their guests, not only faced trauma, but survived in remarkable ways. Dr. Bell, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so let's well, first, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Oh, I'm from Orange County, California. I grew up in a little town called Fullerton, where Leo Fender lived a couple streets away and invented the electric guitar.
Nice.
And I'm currently in Laguna Beach, California.
Okay. So where did all this start for you?
Well, it started with my birth. I didn't realize it, but I wrote this book, Post-Traumatic Thriving, and I wrote it kind of in this professorial, tell others what to do kind of tone, which frankly, looking back, I'm embarrassed about. Long story short, I was born with a congenital heart defect, and I had open heart surgery when I was 11. And that's, trauma to a kid, including myself, is traumatic. And, but when I was 11, the doctors patted me on the back and said, good job, kid, you're all fixed. Go have a great life. So I was physically repaired through the open heart surgery, which was great news. But I never processed the trauma that I had gone through for the first 11 years of my life. So fast forward to my career where I'm working on the World Trade Center and Flight 93 and the nuclear test sites on the Bikini Atoll and John Benet Ramsey and O.J. Simpson. I'm working on all these cases and meeting all these people. And I thought, well, I have fascinating access to the people behind the headlines. And I wanted to give them more than, just, gee, I'm really sorry you're going through this, hell in your lives. I wanted to put my research skills to work. So I did. And for 15 years, I researched trauma, the trauma cycle and what it all means. And then when I got the manuscript done, in quotes, I realized that through another event in my life of climbing Mount Kilimanjaro that I had my heart problems came back. And to avoid the operating room again, I found another cardiologist. She was very holistic. And of course, there's Western medicine, but she diagnosed me as post-traumatic stress disorder from my childhood trauma. And I had to go back and not only address that, but I had to rewrite the whole manuscript because it affected me too.
Wow. Okay, wait, hold on here. So if I may, wow. Now the childhood trauma, the trauma of, forgive my ignorance here, the trauma of needing surgery at that young age.
Yeah, it was a lot of layers. I mean, trauma is a complex thing because it layers up. It's not usually just one thing. It was the fact my parents, I have wonderful parents, but they didn't tell me the truth. They kept a lot of stuff from me as a kid, and I found out accidentally, or I found out in very harsh ways that I had these procedures coming up that were frankly very painful. And I don't blame them, because what parent wants to tell their kids, horrible things. And then the surgery itself, and then, being in hospitals and being jabbed,
Sure.
over and over again. And then the trauma.
Traumatic.
Yeah. And then at school, I couldn't run as fast as the other kids. My legs would give out with the poor circulation problems I had. So it was layering up.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. So you go on with the pat on your back, thinking you're okay. Now, you talked about these professional experiences. How did you and why did you get into that? And what were you doing specifically?
That's another story. I was in the swimming pool. I was going to go to law school, and I had a background with going through grad school. I worked doing real estate appraisals and real estate type deals. And then I applied to law school, and I got in, and I thought, I just don't know that I'm feeling this. And I thought, what if I take my skill set in terms of valuing real estate and turn it upside down and look at disasters, things that cause a loss in value. The legal term is diminution of value. And nobody was really doing it very well, if at all. But this is, decades ago. Anyway, I called all my clients and I just said, from now on, I want to work on the landslides and the wildfires and the earthquake type, damage scenarios. I just did it because I thought it'd be interesting. Little did I know that all these major disasters were in my future.
Wow. And it's, as you're talking, I'm wondering, and perhaps you did too at some point, is there a connection between that early trauma and your interest in these traumas too? So, all right. So how do things evolve for you?
Well, as I say, I got into this career. I'm working on these gigantic cases. The O.J. Simpson case just blew the doors open on my career, because before that, I had no agenda to be well known or anything else. When I got working on the O.J. Simpson case, the Brown family lives right down the street from me, literally. And so that was just kind of I don't know if you call it luck, but it just kind of happened. And the word got out to the media that I was working on it. And I literally had reporters coming in from Japan to interview me.
What were you doing, Randall? What were you doing specifically?
Oh, I was working with Lou Brown to deal with the crime scene, the Bundy crime scene. What do we do with this property? Every disaster has emotional sides, but it has practical sides. I was dealing with the practical side.
Okay. So, all right. So continue on here. So how do we get to this podcast, and how do we get to, and we'll talk about the book as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, the O.J. Simpson case happened, and then I was profiled in People magazine and L.A. Times and on. And then the Heaven's Gate cult case came up in San Diego, and that also came my way. And I was doing the same thing. I was managing the Heaven's Gate cult mansion, which was bizarre. That guy, that's a whole nother episode. But then I got case after case, and then I had this epiphany that, gee whiz, I know all these people. Oftentimes they become my friends through the process of working with them. So I switched from kind of the economic side of things to the sociological side of things. Wow. And that's how the book evolved from there.
What an interesting field. I mean, specifically, so you're working with the kind of physical aspects or the real estate. What were you doing specifically with these cases?
Oh, yeah. Well, they were insurance claims or legal claims where, for example, I just worked on Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Katrina. We have tens of thousands of clients who had their homes blown apart. So they got to submit legal claims or insurance claims to get compensation for the damage they've been through.
Okay. So let's kind of segue to the book.
Yeah.
Why did you write it? Who's it for?
Well, that's really a fascinating question, because I thought I was writing it as a favor for my clients. And then I realized that I think maybe subconsciously I was writing it for myself, because I had this unresolved problem that I've talked about. I did write it for my clients. And then from there, anybody that wants another view at trauma from kind of an analytical point of view, where I go from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, 5 stages of grief to the literature on post-traumatic growth. And then I kind of bridge it. So you go from literally the first chapter is on shock. The final chapter is kind of the pinnacle of trauma recovery. And I cover 15 stages along the way. And it's for anybody that wants to really see the complete picture of what the trauma cycle looks like.
You talked about Mount Kilimanjaro and kind of almost reigniting your own trauma. What happened there? Did you finally or at some point seek help? And if so, what did you do?
Yeah. Well, a buddy of mine came to visit and spent the weekend here, and we were all hanging out and talking, and he says, hey, I'm going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in the summer. And I'd been to Africa and I'd seen Mount Kilimanjaro from a distance, and I had this kind of romantic notion that it was a stroll up to the top, because it's a very beautiful, gradual looking mountain, and you don't have any sense of scale, looking at it from the Sahara or the desert there, whatever it's called. So so I said, sure, without doing my homework. Well, I went and got a checkup, which I think is probably a good idea before you do something like that. And the doctor said, I think you need to have surgery. Wow. And that shocked me. And then I went to another doctor, and she woke me up to this whole, you're dealing with stress, because I was just standing on the treadmill doing nothing, and my heart rate was 150 beats per second. And she goes, I don't know what's wrong with you. And that's where I got my diagnosis for PTSD. But we worked through that very successfully. And that's where that whole element of my life came from.
Mm-hmm. So back to the book, you said you kind of enumerate kind of 15 stages or cycles. And you said you wrote this in a sense for your clients. What did you want to illuminate, or what did you want to share?
I wanted to share the fact that, in my opinion, unresolved trauma, particularly childhood trauma, is really the number one problem on the earth. It's not alcoholism. It's not incarceration. It's not workaholism. These are all symptoms of unresolved trauma. My particular poison is workaholism, but that's not better or worse than any other addiction, if you want to call it that. And so I wanted to show, in particular, my clients and myself and others, basically what this cycle looks like. The problem is, Guy, this stuff isn't taught in school, and yet by college age, 66 to 85% of people have already been hit by one trauma, sometimes two. And by the time you're my age, you've been hit with, more than one. So we need the skill set. We need the tools to deal with trauma. And I was really trying to get at that. It was in the academic literature, but it wasn't really made publicly available to regular folks.
Do you think, or are you seeing a shift in awareness now in our culture?
Oh, absolutely. Because, I made the classic mistake where I didn't talk about my problems for years. And that's, it landed me almost on a second trip to the operating room. And that's the old school way of thinking about it. On the podcast I do with Tanya, and that's Tanya Brown. She's the sister of Nicole Brown Simpson. I mean, we have guests coming in talking about really ugly stuff. Mm-hmm. And in the old days, people wouldn't talk about it. And that's really the first step of trauma recovery, is stop bottling it up inside, because you may look fine on the outside, but inside there's an internal war going on. And we've had people talk about murders they committed, murders that were on their side of things, being incarcerated, of course, the alcoholism, suicide attempts. But what's astounding to me is that people are opening up about these conversations, which is the thing you got to do to heal.
Right. How hard was that for you? Or what kind of adjustment did you have to make in terms of, maybe admitting to yourself that you were traumatized and sharing it? It's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, I'm a textbook case study and not how not to do things, because I made all the classic mistakes. I bottled it up. When the topic came up about heart surgery when I was a kid, typically around my family, I quickly tried to change the topic. I got angry about it internally. I didn't really get mad at the people around me, but inside I felt that rage that was unprocessed trauma. And, it manifested in all kinds of, health issues, which couldn't be explained really until I really addressed the real cause of the problem.
And when you did start talking about it or sharing your experience, what did you notice happening in terms of your own experience? Or did you notice anything?
Well, it was first very awkward and very uncomfortable talking about this stuff. And I'm not saying that we need to, broadcast our problems to the world, but we need to find a trusted therapist, a good friend, somebody to open up to about these things. And so it was very uncomfortable talking about it. I even hated talking to my cardiologist about it. And she's super cool. Mm-hmm. But to just admit that, lots of guys have kind of that macho, I can take care of this on my own kind of persona. I'm no exception to that kind of rule. And so it was difficult. It was awkward, but I found that the more that I did it and the more I researched about the need to take care of myself, to open up to somebody about it. At first, I only opened up to her about it. And then I opened up to a couple more people. And now I'm telling you, and I'm telling anybody that wants to know. And I put it in the book, So that for me, that's very healing and therapeutic, but I'm trying to demonstrate the process of dealing with trauma using myself as an example of the wrong way to do it and now the right way to do it.
I so admire that. And I do appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story. And it's in a sense reminiscent of my own, which is, when I was younger, my trauma was being bullied. And that just jacked up my life in a lot of different ways, and my self-esteem and how I showed up in relationships. And I didn't really realize that, in a sense, that was kind of the pull to me going to graduate school for psychology and so forth. Yeah. And it really was only until I started interviewing guests and hearing them, like yourself, share their own experience and be courageous enough to do that allowed me to talk about it. And it's pretty incredible, when you look back to your old self in a sense and imagine yourself not wanting to share, not wanting to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And being bullied is horrible. I never was a bully, and I never was bullied because I'm just kind of big and tall and I guess mean looking, but bullied, hurt people, and the bullies that bullied you or others, they're dealing with their trauma. So it works both ways, and that's not to excuse bullying because that's an inexcusable behavior. But they're got stuff going on at home or whatever that's causing them to act out that way, and then the cycle continues. And that's what I love about your work, your podcast, this discussion is that opening up the doors and talking about it, unlike, at least my parents and our community where we just didn't talk about it. If you were bullied, you just suck it up, buttercup, and had that kind of mentality. That stuff doesn't work. The stuff we're doing now is far more effective. Right.
So when did you start the podcast and why did you start the podcast?
Well, it started about a year ago. I was at dinner with Tanya and we're just kind of talking. She brought up the idea. I had no aspirations of doing a podcast. And so I went back and really thought about it and looked into what it involved. As you know, it's a lot more work than people realize. But, I looked at the whole landscape and I thought, you know what? If I really believe, and I really do believe that unresolved trauma is the number one problem on the earth, I gotta, I'm moving into retirement age. I gotta put some time towards really talking about that and sharing what I've learned on the cases I worked on and having really great guests in, because Tanya knows everybody. So we did our first season. It's gone really well. We've had over 3.5 million views on TikTok and social media. And so we're going into our second season. And it's just a conversation that I really love, even though the topics are ugly. I mean, who wants to talk about bullying or a crime that they committed? But you know what? I see the effects. I see the people that were really traumatized now doing really cool things with their lives. And while I will never appreciate the heart surgery trauma I went through, I'm sure you'll never appreciate being bullied. What we can appreciate are the lessons we learned from them and pass those lessons along. That's a very valuable thing.
So she came to you with what premise?
She just kind of said, hey, why don't we do a podcast? She had tried a couple podcasts before. They kind of flopped. I'm the kind of person, if I say I'm going to do it, it happens, but I think about it carefully before I commit. Mm-hmm. And I think she just was looking for a stable platform for the podcast. And I thought, you know what? I've got some friends that are podcasters. It really looks like fun. And we took the leap and, what can I say? It's working out pretty good.
Well, did she say, I want to do a podcast on post-traumatic thriving, or was that?
Oh, yeah. Well, on trauma, we didn't have a title for it. And then I was talking to a podcaster from a friend of mine, and he said, look, you idiot, it's the title's really obvious. It's on your book, Post-Traumatic Thriving. Right. I came up with that term. It's been very catchy. It's caught on. And so, but it all started under the Genesis idea of talking about trauma.
All right. So let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Dr. Randall Bell. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you, Randall?
Oh, just go to drbell.com, and the podcast is on Spotify and Apple and everywhere. But I love the conversation, and so I love getting the emails. But that's how you get a hold of me. I'm easy to find.
Okay, so kind of before we close out here, so who's the book for?
The book is for somebody who realizes that they have an unresolved trauma in their lives and that it's harming their quality of life and wants real information because the science is so good and they want easy access to that information without wallowing through a library for 15 years doing academic research. I already did that job. But there's a lot of exhibits that simplify the concepts. They're very powerful, but the thing is, Guy, they're very simple. It's for that person that needs the information. They need it now, and they don't have 15 years to read all the academic books.
Can you pick maybe one or two things from the book that maybe you were surprised to learn or feel people need to know?
Yeah, the two big ones, I call them the dynamic dual. I lay them right out in chapter 1 is what we call sitting in the fire. That's talking about it. We've already kind of addressed that. And the second one, which we haven't talked about, is the need for slow breathing exercises, whether you call it Lamaze or meditation or yoga. I don't care what you call it. But deep breathing exercises, there's a whole physiology that I have an actual picture in the book, how the brain reacts and the fight, flight, freeze response. Deep breathing exercises are supported by Harvard, at least a dozen Harvard studies, how it resets the brain. Very simple, but very powerful in terms of calming things down, getting the cortisone levels down. Belly fat is directly related to cortisol, not really what you eat. Belly fat is particular to stress. So those two elements will get people really going in the right direction. And then there's a lot more details from there.
Awesome. All right, Dr. Bell, I want to thank you so much for being here. Randall Bell, the book and podcast is called Post-Traumatic Thriving. We'll have those linked up at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. Sir, awesome having you here.
Same here. Thank you so much, Guy.
All right, take care.